The following podcast was recorded on Thursday, November 10th, 2022, featuring Sam Rines of Arbor Data Science. To hear the podcast in real time, you can sign up for a free trial at arborresearch.com or by emailing Gus Handler directly at gus.handler@arborresearch.com. You can also call Arbor Research and Trading at 1-800-606-1872. Thanks for your time and enjoy the podcast. Welcome everyone to Talking Data. I'm your host, Kristen Radosh with Arbor Research and Trading, joined today by our commentator, Sam Rines of Arbor Data Science. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning, Kristen.
We're looking forward to hearing about today your discussion on two industries that seem to be the most important to Fed policy going forward. Sam, there's two dominant narratives floating around the market. We've got energy and we've got layoffs in the US tech sector. Meta announced 11,000 layoffs. We've heard from Salesforce, Twitter, Lyft, Stripe. The list keeps growing. How does energy and tech impact markets via FOMC policy?
Yeah, so this is really fun. There's kind of two dominant narratives floating around: energy crisis and tech layoffs. And I think those two have a lot more to do with what the underlying economy is really all about than I think it's really given credit for, right? Between the Fed wanting to see a little bit less of a, call it, tight labor market and wanting inflation to come down. These are the two places that really seem to kind of be doing the job potentially for the Fed. If you begin to see some sort of decline in energy prices, that's going to flow through to inflation and underlying inflation metrics. When you have significantly higher energy costs and those begin to become embedded into the system, that's a negative for inflation moving forward, right? You begin to have UPS and FedEx embed excess charges on freight. You begin to have airlines put additional charges for airline fuel. And those surcharges tend to be a little stickier and tend to flow into prices on a continual basis and over time, and they're a little difficult to pull back. So energy is very important to the narrative here, and so is tech. And there's a story that's in a narrative that's been floating around that tech overhired and had too many people call it on the books. And part of the reason for that was, they needed a lot of people during COVID, right? Everybody was ordering stuff offline. Amazon needed more employees. They announced that they were going to have a hiring freeze earlier this year and potentially some less of a hiring binge going into the holiday season. And then you flow through to the names that you mentioned. There's an awful lot of, call it, overstaffing that's being taken care of and taken out of the system rather quickly here. I think that's really an interesting narrative to kind of think about. When oil prices collapsed in 2014, 2015, it was a completely different story on the labor front, not so much today.
And let's take a look at U.S. energy. It tends to be highly cyclical. If we look back at the past decade, what are the highlights? How has it really changed?
It's been a wild ride for energy over the past decade. You go back to the 2014, 2016 timeframe. It's worth remembering that the U.S. was the one that kind of caused the collapse in global oil prices. We were producing too much. Saudi Arabia was getting mad at us. And Saudi said, enough is enough. We're going to pump and we're going to push the price of oil down below your marginal cost of production. And we went from over $100 a barrel on a fairly consistent basis through, call it 2012 to early 2014 to $30. And 30 to 50 was kind of the range moving forward, and sometimes 60. But oil prices really weren't part of a broader narrative, right? Energy was cheap and it was plentiful and nobody really cared. And that story only got worse when we went into COVID and we had too much oil. We had storage was filled, and you had oil prices go negative for a little while there. I mean, it was a crazy story. And energy companies, particularly in the U.S., were forced to right-size their employment for the time. So you saw a significant amount of layoffs in the 2014-16 timeframe, and then we kind of think about the employment boom coming out of COVID. Until fairly recently, that was not the case for energy, particularly in, call it, the mid portion of 2020 and into early 2021. It was simply, what is going on here? we're in trouble. So they laid a lot of people off. So it was kind of a tale of two industries there. Tech hiring everybody they could, and oil trying to figure out how to survive. And now it's the exact opposite story, with tech really dominating the layoffs here, and energy layoffs and job cuts barely registering.
We have a chart we want to bring up next. So speaking of those layoffs, it's really a coastal story. What are your thoughts on this?
It's a coastal story because that's where the tech companies tend to be, right? You have Amazon, Washington State, you have all of California's coast being dominated by the tech industry. So it's a story of, that tech tends to be on the coast. Boston is a biotech and tech hub as well. New York actually started to have quite this tech scene somewhat recently, Miami, et cetera. So I think that's really the story here, is that the East and the West are going to feel a little bit more of the pain from the labor market and layoffs than you're going to see in the Midwest and call it the South, right? The South is somewhat of, and Midwest are energy, manufacturing, and agriculture, and those are the three things that you really want to be in right now. If you want to see what the world is really kind of moving towards, it's energy and food, and then manufacturing on the side. So I think the middle portion of America, call it the flyover, might not be so much of a flyover for the time being.
And speaking of all these layoffs, we've seen it in the headlines many times recently, is bad news good news as it comes to the Fed?
Sort of, not yet. That's the interesting part about this, I think. When you hear 11,000 people laid off from Facebook, that sounds like a really big number, except that we hire somewhere between 5.9 and 6.2-ish million people in recent months every single month. So the underlying dynamism of the US economy it kind of lends itself to a little bit of a, ooh, does that really matter? Like, does 11,000 matter? It matters for those 11,000 people, certainly. It's not a great feeling to be laid off. But at the same time, when you really aggregate the metrics, I'm not sure that you're going to see it really begin to have an effect on unemployment in a meaningful way. Maybe it has an effect on vacancies, right? One of the things that we've seen the Fed really focus on is vacancies to unemployment. Maybe tech companies begin to pull back on their hiring and therefore their job openings, and you begin to have vacancies come down, which means that the incremental demand for labor may be cooling a little bit. And you have a little bit of an uptick potentially in unemployment. That would be a positive for the Fed. The Fed early on came for your house, then the Fed is kind of in a way going for your job.
We want to take a look next and talk about really job searches. If you look at this chart, you see the peak. We had the Great Resignation in late 2021. Where are we at today? And what does it matter when you look at workers' reactions?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite parts of the labor market to look at. When people begin to feel as though their employment and their employment prospects, their ability to find another job, are challenged, they begin to kind of retrench into their existing position, and they don't search for other jobs, right? They don't go, I wonder if so and so is hiring. Let me search it. That tends to be one of the first things that they stop doing. Quits begin to decline rather dramatically, and so do job searches. So I think this is a really interesting chart to pay attention to as we move forward. That people really aren't that scared of losing their job yet. Yes, job searches have declined. That's a mild positive for, call it, a better balance in the labor market, but it's not a sign that people are truly scared that their job's going away and that their prospects are really declining. That's what we saw in COVID, and even in the pre-COVID-ish era, you had seen a little bit of that begin to flow into the labor market, but not enough. The Great Resignation is certainly over. I mean, you are seeing much less. In terms of, I would say, quiet quitting. I would say quiet quitting is probably on the decline at the moment. There's this hilarious video that I think was kind of signaling that Meta needed to do some layoffs, where it was day in the life of a 25-year-old Meta product manager. And it was basically a TikTok, 15-second TikTok of exactly what not to do if you want to keep your job, which is not work.
I did see that, yes.
It was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, and it's not the only one out there, right? So I think there was a little bit of decadence in the tech industry and a little bit of self-assurance that there was nothing bad that could happen to them because the metaverse was coming quickly, and that has unwound.
In summary today, Sam, what are some other key indicators that we should be watching for?
I would be watching quits. Quits is the number one indicator of labor market health and dynamism that I pay attention to. This is one way to do it through job searches. Another way would be looking at the Indeed job openings. I think that is incredibly important. They publish that rather frequently. It's free on Fred for people that want to look at it. Those two, to me, are really going to determine how the labor market evolves from here. Are we done with tech layoffs? Probably not. But are layoffs really going to spread through other portions of the economy? And I'm not entirely convinced that's the case. Even with higher interest rates, construction hires were higher last month. It's, leisure and hospitality, you can't find employees, so I highly doubt you're going to see significant layoffs there. Airlines can't find enough employees. You can kind of click down through the list. So while there's a lot of headline grabbing from tech companies, I think there's also an underlying demand for labor that's still pretty strong and being masked by a lot of these, call it headlines that are pretty clickbaity.
Well, Sam, thank you for your thoughts today, and thank you everyone for joining us. As a reminder, if you have any questions on Arbor Research, Bianco Research, or Arbor Data Science, you can contact us by emailing Gus Handler at gus.handler@arborresearch.com. Have a great day.